Prime Minister's personal limos to the Taj Mahal.
The deployment of RCMP assets is based on operational consideration, including the safety of the officers and the safety of the Prime Minister.
Fire exchange in the House today. Opposition MPs, that's Peggy Nash, demanding answers why the Prime Minister needed to take two armoured limousines all the way to India. The price tag reportedly nearly $500,000. The C-17 that takes them cost over $21,000 an hour to fly there. Does the security threat situation there warrant the cost? Again, the government says this is all up to the RCMP, but we can't get any reason from the RCMP of what the threat assessment was. Does India pose this kind of threat? Cannot the Prime Minister use Indian armored cars to go to the Taj Mahal where he visited with his wife? Let's find out. Our security expert Ray Boisvert is here. He's the former Assistant Director of Intelligence with CSIS. He's now the President and CEO of ISEC, Integrated Strategies, and he's also our intelligence and security expert here at CBC. Ray, give us some perspective here. I mean, we have been peppering the RCMP at CBC. What is the threat of India? Why did the Prime Minister, who's only really taken these kind of armored vehicles to places like Haiti, why does he need to take them to visit India, a democracy, to visit places like the Taj Mahal?
Well, Evan, I think for a lot of people in my business, India represents probably the best possible example of a theme park of domestic threats. It covers the whole spectrum of still some violent groups of Maoist, extreme left, to Islamic extremism. So there's a number of issues, probably a lot of reasons why the RCMP, at least the officer in charge, probably took a very deep, long look at the threat assessments and decided to go with the best possible safety piece.
But what about trusting the Indian security? I mean, they're used to this. They have armored vehicles there. That's a country that makes more cars than Canada.
Well, armored vehicles are not all armored vehicles. We've seen that through the Afghan experience. Various companies make things, and not all of them are as secure and as safe as they purport to be. I think both the principal agencies there, the RAW, the Research Analysis Wing, and the IB, the Intelligence Bureau, are good agencies, but on the ground it's the Indian Police Service, and that's a very different thing. They're large, very underfunded organizations, and the RCMP always assesses these issues based on their own threat assessment. The information is available from organizations like CSIS and the ITAC, the Integrated Terrorism Assessment Center, and a bunch of other ones. And then they'll take a look at what the locals are offering in terms of security, and they will supplement through agreement and negotiation as to what they'll bring forward. And that includes everything from weapons to their armored vehicles.
Can we read anything into this? The fact that the RCMP chooses to ship Canadian armored limos to India. By the way, I mean, he took them to Haiti. I think people may appreciate that. Or Afghanistan, sure. But they also appear to have sent a security detail of up to 70 Canadian personnel. Would they do this kind of thing without some kind of security assessment that shows there is a perceived threat to the Canadian Prime Minister in India, so there needs to be extra precautions made?
I think that's a reasonable assumption, to be a tipping point somewhere in there for the commander on the ground, or the commander who's in charge of the security detail, to say that I need the following resources. So it's very much a tactical decision. It's one made strictly by that person who's in charge of the operation. And my thought would be that there must be something in that threat matrix that drove them to go to that extra, no pun intended, to that extra detail of having the vehicle on the ground.
Well, that's interesting. So there might be a tipping point, because this is a break-in tradition. I mean, when he's got his own, security vehicles, these Cadillacs going to the Taj Mahal, people think, why does he need this? So you're saying there'd be a security analysis done, and there'd be some tipping point where the RCMP says there's a potential threat to the Prime Minister going to India.
Oh, absolutely. And I think in this case, it's probably one that, in my view, given my understanding of that environment, would be worthy of some pretty positive consideration. At the end of the day, they're going to have to make that decision based on the circumstances. And the circumstance would lead one to believe that that's a dangerous environment. Just remember 2008, there were about a half a dozen significant bombings in the city of Mumbai. We had the attack that caused several hundred deaths downtown in Mumbai. So it's a place with a long history of deep religious, ethnic strife, as well as I said, everything from Islamic extremism to old-style Maoist, leftist violent radicalization.
What would the security intelligence people there for the Canadians? Would they be carrying firearms? What kind of firepower would they have if indeed the threat assessment is this high?
Well, the RCMP will negotiate that country by country, event by event. They'll do that with the host police agency and the Home Affairs Office and so on. In this case, I'm not sure what they finally agreed to. Clearly, the locals have to provide the bulk, and they have the shared responsibility of protecting internationally protected persons, and they must do that to the best of their abilities. But quite often, it's the gap in that understanding from the Canadian standard as to what those abilities are that can be brought to bear, especially if there's now rising concern that there's something amiss and that the Prime Minister and his detail is under threat. There's also the issue that Canada plays a very different role than it did years ago. We're not as well loved and liked as we may have been. We're no longer the Sweden of North America. We've taken some strong positions on some big issues, and I think all those things sort of play into the assessment.
Last question. How closely would CSIS be involved in this RCMP decision? The Prime Minister says it's not us, but would the PMO, who would be involved in this? Would it be Public Security? Would it be RCMP? Would CSIS be involved? I mean, just give us a sense of how you make this matrix of decisions to spend big money to do this.
Well, the RCMP own the biggest chunk of the whole process. They have their own threat assessment teams that create their own product for their purposes. In this case, this is for a foreign visit involving the highest level of government. The other part, it's informed by CSIS assessments. CSIS does a number of analysis on the country profiles to understanding what is that issue in that environment, which terrorist organizations are potentially problematic. Same with ITAC and a few others, the Department of Foreign Affairs. They would all contribute that. So diplomatic reporting to intelligence reporting from CSIS would all be part of that mixture. At the end of the day, though, the police commander, in this case would be a superintendent or inspector in charge of the Prime Minister's detail, if not even more senior today, would make that key decision as to whether he or she wants to have that type of capability.
Ray, there's a lot of politics around this. The opposition saying, why does he need to do this? This spends big money, visiting the Taj Mahal with your own limo, and we'll talk about this more. But should there be more transparency so Canadian taxpayers know when the Prime Minister is doing this, why they need to spend that extra money? Or do you think it's acceptable that they say it's a security threat done and Canadian taxpayers basically have to trust that the Prime Minister needs to ship around big cars?
Well, it's been my experience in the business that there's a deep and very well-respected separation between the politics and the operational tactical decisions made by either the law enforcement official or in the case of organizations like CSIS who bring assessments to bear. You have to speak truth to power in my business on the intelligence side, and on the physical security side, the RCMP have to do their thing. And that decision will be done by them and for their reasons. And I think that has to remain secret for operational purposes.
I think I'll leave it there. Security intelligence expert, of course, former assistant director at CSIS, Ray Boisvert. This is the topic of conversation right now, giving us good perspective on how these decisions are actually made. Ray, thanks for that.
Pleasure.
Ray Boisvert for CBC News.